Hello and welcome to the AIM webinar series. AIM is a global industry alliance which represents the interest of everyone using barcoding, RFID, and related data capture technologies, including manufacturers, software vendors, integrators, governments, and end users. AIM membership is about supporting standards, community, advocacy, and knowledge. Specifically, you will receive early access to industry technical research and information. Your membership is about supporting standards, community, advocacy, and knowledge. Specifically, you will receive early access to industry technical research and information. Your membership gives you the opportunity to influence the direction of our industry and actively participate in research. AIM is an investment in your future. Before we get started, I do have a few housekeeping items to go over. First, you'll notice that you are muted upon entry. If you do have any questions for one of our expert panelists, just send those over to the chat dialog box at AIM Member Services. We'll answer as many questions as possible after the panel discussion. Also, a recording will be available and all registrants will receive notification for when that is ready to download. Today's blockchain subject matter experts are Scott Austin, the Senior Executive Vice President of Americas for Everledger. Scott leads Everledger's business in the Americas, working closely with the Everledger team to make technology breakthroughs that solve the challenges facing their clients. Scott is also actively involved in investor relations with their partners. We also have Raphael Bini, who is blockchain technology specialist for OneTrueID. Raphael helps the company to develop anti-counterfeiting and traceability solutions using blockchain technology. And last but not least, we have Terry Myers, the CEO of Infratab. She's responsible for the overall company operations with a focus on product strategy. And before that, over 30 years of executive management experience from startup to large corporation, as well as management consulting. Welcome, everyone.
Thanks, Mike.
Hi.
Good evening.
Hello.
To start, I think it's important for us to define blockchain, and who better to do that than AIM's IoT Industry Group Chair, Scott Austin. So Scott, take it away.
Thanks, Mike, and thanks everyone for joining today. I think to understand the future of blockchain and what blockchain is today, we really need to look at a bit of history of the internet. And essentially in the late 80s and early 90s, we saw the evolution of the internet and email and really branch into what we know today as the World Wide Web in the mid-90s. Essentially from there, we looked at the evolution of the internet into B2B applications, B2C applications, and we found that really it was being used for global services of communication, financial transactions, etc. That's the next slide, Mike, if you could please. So then we saw that progression of the internet until about 2009, and in the scope of things, we're not talking a lot of time. If you think back to 10, 15 years ago and think of the devices you were using, the way that you were using the internet, it's a lot different to what we know today. But essentially, a guy called Satoshi Nakamoto in 2009 created Bitcoin, introduced the concept of blockchain as a decentralized ledger, and really introduced peer-to-peer transactions in a very secure manner, provided an opportunity for a platform that was operating on consensus mechanisms where parties in a chain agree on different transactions and they have trust and confidence in those transactions, supported by some pretty heavy cryptography and computing that took place to support that. Today, we see the blockchain technology supporting both in a private and a public environment, tracking not only currency and not only being used for cryptocurrency such as Bitcoin, but also being used for other applications to support greater transparency and trust of supply chains with product identity, enabling smart contracts to be coded in to the chain to support through the cryptography of transactions through highly secure servers, different contracts that may be delivered upon and may be delivered upon automatically through computing. And subsequently, if we look at the future of the internet, we will see that blockchain will form a very important future for higher security standards and more efficient and trustworthy transactions through the internet. And we're seeing that now with standards, new standards being launched by W3 covering blockchain technology and IoT technology. And subsequently, we're starting to see a wonderful transition of the internet into something that is underpinned by the blockchain as we know it today. In the next slide, I've given an example of how a full supply chain can lodge various independent elements of data across that supply chain for validation within a blockchain environment. So if we look at the diamond industry, which is one of the first industries to adopt blockchain across the entirety of the industry to solve problems such as substitution, such as fraudulent activity such as child labor or a lack of understanding and transparency about where and under what conditions that diamond was mined. Indeed, the substitution of the very collateral of a diamond being the certificate of a diamond. How can an industry like that, a very old industry, utilize the blockchain platform to independently lodge and validate certain transactions pertaining to the diamond, its identity, and its transactions throughout its life cycle? And then once that fabric and the rails of industry have been laid through the blockchain technology, how can we use that to validate some of the sustainability criteria of industry, some of the work practices and certification pertaining not only to the diamond, but indeed to the handlers of the diamond across the life cycle, and key sustainability elements such as carbon footprint of each stage in the diamond process. And the distributed ledger technology, public or private, with different attributes, are giving us the opportunity now to have that greater trust and transparency into a supply chain and leverage the technology to independently validate critical aspects of handling throughout the supply chain of an object. Hope that wasn't too confusing, Mike.
No, thank you, Scott. And staying with you to start our panel discussion, how complex is it to deploy blockchain in real-world solutions, and how does that affect the cost effectiveness of a project?
So look, I think what we're seeing is the technology is in its maturation. As we've seen the evolution of the internet and computing as we know it now, we're seeing the evolution of blockchain technology. And from that perspective, we are seeing different form factors emerge, different fabrics or protocols, if you like, emerge around blockchain that some have different attributes, some different strengths and weaknesses. It's sort of like the internet battle that we had between Safari and Internet Explorer going back many years ago, and then Firefox came in, and we're seeing that sort of evolution in the blockchain space as well. So look, I don't want to create any dispersions. It is a technically complex deployment. To deploy a strong and effective, efficient blockchain structure to support any transactional base. So I think once there's very big geeky side of blockchain, and I think there's a lot of companies that start out with white papers and analyzing different industries and how they can apply the technology, which is great and part of the natural process. But it is a complex deployment at this stage. It's important that you're managing expectations of stakeholders, because you know, it is not the internet, and it's amazing feeling when you wake up one day and you realize that you are on a blockchain and you can't effectively change things overnight. So, you know, when you lodge transactions in a blockchain infrastructure, they are irrevocable. They are permanent. So from that perspective, what influence does that have on a deployment? What if you make a mistake? What if data is not properly checked and cleansed, what if you have fraudulent activity sitting within data channels? So you have to have really strong management of the blockchain infrastructure. You have to look at how the architecture of that is positioned to optimize the performance and the trustworthiness of the channel. You have to really, I think, start small, focused, and expand out. Whether it's public or private, it does have an associated cost. It's the hosting cost, the data cost, and infrastructure cost, but also it's the learning costs, I suppose. And it's an engineered solution. Like RFID is deployed in the early 2000s, it's an engineered solution, and you have to engineer it correctly.
Thank you, Scott. Raphael, do you have anything to add to that?
Yes, I think Scott was very clear about the implementation of blockchain technology. I think that a lot of people thinks that blockchain is maintained by the community for free, and I need only to use, or they need only to use a wallet to do everything. But nothing is free. If we use a public blockchain, we need to pay the miners of any transaction. If we want to use a private blockchain, the company needs to introduce extra cost for managing every node, to create the nodes, to also technically blockchain is only the database, is only the place where we put information, but we also need many other things to create a supply chain, like mobile apps, programs, services, and everything needs servers, developers, good vision to choose the best blockchain technology around. And so everything needs a different approach, and we need to study everything because it's simple to fall with the wrong choice.
Thank you, Raphael. And Terry, do you have anything to add as well?
Oh, I do. And I'm going to just start out by saying I come from a different perspective than the other two, because we came out it as a maker of a product that monitors freshness. And we were looking for how you could add freshness to the blockchain. And so our approach was to evaluate private networks and be able to tie that private network into our own way of managing a handover from one company to the next, and then be able to make it into a blockchain. And for us, that turned out to be fairly simple. And we were able to take what we had and add the blockchain to it, and be able to create that blockchain document. What we were really looking at was how small a company could be in order to be able to take advantage of blockchain. And that is a question that's still a little expensive, but you can see that the prices are going down. We were paying about $1,000 a month in order to support what we were doing for a small business. We didn't get into what it would cost for a large business, but the implementation was quite good. That's probably it.
Yeah, I think that's a very good point, Terry. I mean, we're starting to see changes in pricing models from some of the big suppliers of secure hosting services. So whether that's IBM, Oracle, Microsoft, the pricing structures are changing. and it's quite interesting to see how they are moving to cater for larger transactional bases and larger adoption. So it's exciting times.
Okay, thank you. And starting with you, Scott, are you finding the consensus mechanisms or smart contract features of blockchain being fully utilized in current real-world deployments?
No, is probably the simple answer to that. But I think that's all part of the maturation phase. What we have seen is an evolution of the chain elements. A lot of companies using blockchain for higher security, for validation and trust mechanisms around their certification, around transactional areas. So you have companies that deposit data into a blockchain and companies that receive it or use it or view it from the perspective of the beachhead actors, if you like, in the process. A lot of those actors are saying this is a great trust mechanism for us. This is a great security mechanism for us. So a lot of the entities that we work with have started that way, have laid the foundations then for now the use of smart contracts. So examples of smart contracts in a supply chain would be the Auburn RFID lab have conducted a great initiative with major retail players and industry players over the last couple of years, really looking at how RFID transactions from a supply chain perspective can be lodged within a blockchain and have a smart contract lodged behind them to support simple things such as over or under deliveries. Industry wastes so much money every year on small transactions validating what was delivered. So if I said 100 t-shirts were delivered to you, but the RFID system says that only 99 were received, then subsequently you can lock in a mechanism through a smart contract in the back end that automatically adjusts the ledger from a financial perspective. And that's, a great saving of cost and time, and a clear example of how technology can be used to create efficiency in the supply chain. I think we're also starting to see that corporate sustainability reporting is very much a requirement of industry, of consumers, and we're seeing that validation of certificate and compliance of the full supply chain going back to source is something that can be locked into smart contract scenarios, and we're seeing that happen with diamonds, apparel, wine, spirits, electronic vehicle batteries, and food. And it's an exciting time where we're starting to see some of the rails laid for industry, that the infrastructure is in place now that they can expand at scale and do some really interesting things. And one of those things is obviously utilize smart contract functionality.
Great, thank you, Scott. And Terry, do you have anything you'd like to add to that?
I do. We, again, started the blockchain project because we were interested in the smart contract. We had a mechanism in our current system which had a handover and then provided a digital signature, and so we thought that would be easy. And why we wanted blockchain is because when you're thinking about fresh, we wanted to be able to say when the item was delivered, if it was fresher than it was expected or you got a higher price for it, we wanted to be able to share the advantage and the additional price back through the entire chain. We didn't get too far on that before the project ended. We're starting another one for that purpose. But that was the purpose of it. And that, in addition to, we were tagging fish. In addition to that, we were interested into the counterfeiting and sustainability reporting. That was easy to do, and that worked out really well. But we really didn't get our hooks into how we could do the smart contracts, but that's why we started.
Thank you, Terry. And Raphael?
Well, last year I joined the 1-2-ID family, and I saw how smart contracts are effectively used, for example, in the fashion market. With smart contract, we can define the ownership of goods like t-shirt, bag, shoes, and so on. We can transfer ownership from a customer to another customer. We can create a secondary market and to guarantee that each good is original. So we can fight in the counterfeit or the frauds that sell fake products, for example. Also, we can reward and create loyalty of customers that, for example, do some actions with items that they are purchased. So I think that a blockchain without smart contracts gives a relative advantage, is not a big change respect to a traditional solution based on normal database or other things.
Thank you, Raphael. And Scott, if a company wanted to test blockchain, how would they best go about starting?
Yeah, it's really a process similar to a lot of other technology processes. So as I said before, it's an engineered solution. First of all, you really got to understand the data points, the data flows, using business analysts to drill down into that, but also really evaluate, do you need blockchain? And I think that's the question. Yes, a lot of companies need to ask. It's trendy, but hey, do we really need it? Is it going to solve our pain points? Is it going to bring value? And, often we'll be in a situation where we'll say to companies, hey, you don't really need it. There's not a value proposition there. But often is the case that when you investigate the technology and drill down, you actually can determine value propositions that you didn't even know existed when you started the project. And that's similar to other deployments of technology. And so it's really a matter of what are the data flows, scoping out the project, and then looking for efficiencies along the way, phasing the approach, start on a key pain point, look at POCs and piloting, manage expectations to stakeholders both internally and externally. This is a really collaborative deployment, so you've got to get all the stakeholders together, make sure that they're not expecting that a button will be switched and then everything will be Havana tomorrow. And I think, strong project management as you would with any IT deployment.
Thank you, Scott. Raphael, do you have anything you'd like to add?
I'm fully agree with Scott because this new technology needs analysis by the project manager. I think that other than the project manager, other than the proof of concept, other than rapport with external contractors, I think that it's important to see if this technology has a big impact with customers, and also the community inside behind any blockchains is important because this community can support it and helps any project blockchain based to be more friendly, more useful to users and to final customers. not only for the company that tracks the item.
Thank you, Raphael. And Terry, do you have anything to add as well?
I very much agree with what Scott was saying, and you must look at the pain points because there are certain parts of the supply chain and the segments of the supply chain that you feel really good about using blockchain. In fish, there's so much counterfeiting of fish that blockchain enables you to make somebody sign to commit that it's not counterfeit, and so there's real value to that. There were other parts that didn't really need to have the blockchain transaction, although we did it because of completeness. But you felt good when you had the entire supply chain from make or harvest all the way through transport and then distribute and sell, to be able to know that you knew, in our case, how fresh the product was when it arrived, with everybody saying, yes, this is how they handled it. So I think the value propositions are very important, and there's some parts of the supply chain that are more important than others.
Okay, thank you, Terry. So sticking with you, Terry, what are the challenges for a small or medium-sized company wanting to test blockchain?
Well, of course, as I said earlier, we were really focused on small companies because in our fresh or our perishable supply chain, you have a lot of small partners, and the small partners are especially at the grower or harvesting end, and then also at the restaurant and chef end at the other side. And so we had to decide if it was affordable for them. So you needed to be able to understand what their requirements were and why they would want it. And then also a key thing was the data security. What we found is that it was very important to start by having a set of trading partners who were interested as we were. And we were quite fortunate because we were asked to be a part of this project by a large supermarket chain in Greece. But so we didn't want to develop blockchain. So we looked for a private blockchain platform and worked with them, and were able to conduct a small scale pilot within, very, very rapidly. So it's not hard, especially if you pick the partners and you pick the private blockchain that can assist you.
Thank you, Terry. Raphael, do you have anything you'd like to add to that?
Well, in Italy, small and mid-sized company looks especially for the cost while choosing a new technology like blockchain. Choose a private or a public is difficult, but I think that public blockchain often are open source or offer a testnet at no cost for developers that want to try and see if their solution is working or not. So, as I told before, it's important to define the target, the vision. Why I really want a blockchain for my supply chain? If blockchain help me or not, and choose the simple one to start and test the solution.
Thank you, Raphael. And Scott, do you have anything to add as well?
Yeah, some of the experience we've had with smaller company participation has been, I think, wonderful. I mean, it's an opportunity where small companies in an industry or an ecosystem are able to have a strong contribution to the way in which a system for industry is established, what the governance models are for that system, what the rules are, what can be seen, what data is able to be seen, what data is not able to be seen from commercially sensitive or a privacy perspective. So I think personally, blockchain is a wonderful opportunity for small and medium-sized companies to actually participate at a level that they haven't before, and get value propositions that may help drive their business in a new and different way that they haven't had before in a digital world. So we're seeing exciting participation from many small to medium-sized businesses, and they're working their way through. I think cost is often a barrier. We're trying to make costs achievable for participation. So we put, a lot of time and effort into establishing models that are cost-effective for small and medium-sized companies, enable scale for us as an organization, whilst at the same time enabling value propositions for those participants, and also, putting back to some of the major participants, such as the hosting services for managed blockchain platforms, to say, hey, if we want this to take off as an industry, we need to make this affordable so that we can encourage participation. And so it's actually really exciting. And I think if we look at the different solutions that have been spoken about today, even in the areas of food or fish, to think that a fisherman can benefit from validating fish, whilst a retailer can protect their brand equity by selling genuine product that has strong, traceable and immutable data supporting it. And that same model applies for sourced materials for apparel. Validating that if you say it's cotton from a certain place, it is cotton, say from American cotton. If you say it's Australian wool, it is Australian wool. So we're seeing this across industries, and I think that brings benefit to many of the players in the supply chain.
Thank you, Scott. So Terry, starting with you, will a company get locked into the first platform it chooses to use? What if down the line it realizes it chose the wrong platform?
This was a very large concern for us, mostly because we work from a point of view that we try to be agnostic in almost everything we do. And we were really very, very much concerned with what happens if we pick the wrong platform, what happens if we're early in the game, and what happens if even the company that we picked might not make it. As we evolved and as we implemented it, we had very, very good luck with the private blockchain company that we picked. But we began to see some things I mentioned here, Blockdaemon, which allows you to support cross-platform implementations. And we began to think that what you needed to do when you were choosing what blockchain you were using is to make sure that in our case, you could accommodate sending the information and having the information go to whichever blockchain the larger company, the larger partner you were working with wanted it to go. And so that you needed to be able to have that interoperability from the partner end to be able to not care about being locked in. And that was very, very critical. And I think from our point of view, we thought that was one of the important things that we focused on, and we thought that it was important.
Thank you, Terry. Scott, do you have anything you'd like to add?
Yeah, look, I think I'm with Terry. It's important to stay agnostic, but it's important to also analyze what the strengths and weaknesses are of the platform of choice. And that's, I would say approach that with caution, with care, and also go through the process as mentioned before. Make sure you're doing your homework before you even start a POC. You might find that there are attributes of one platform or one hosting environment that suits you better than others. So that's an important process. We at Everledger have had the maturity after being 5 years old in this industry. That sounds funny, but the maturity of being able to actually conduct a lot of that analysis. We do look at the features and the strengths and weaknesses of different platforms. We do look at how they apply to different verticals and what makes the most sense. What we're also seeing is the evolution of the platforms, that we're starting to see the early stages of interoperability. We're starting to see some features that occur in one platform that might be good to have in another platform. And I think one of the good elements that we have with this industry is the advantation of open source code. So most of the platforms that are in existence here have an open source element to them. And from that perspective, that creates an opportunity for great evolution. And I think we're seeing that in the marketplace now. But look, be careful, be cautious, and it's still a technology that's evolving. So you've got to go through that selection process as you would with any operating system or any protocol that you might be deploying with other applications.
Thanks, Scott. And Raphael, do you have anything to add?
I think the same of Scott and Terry, because we need to choose to start the most standard blockchain, because starting any kind of proof of concept or pilot software or develop something on blockchain is a very, very time-consuming activity. It's not a switch from a SQL Server to a blockchain node. It's important, do not disperse the forces in a small project or strange blockchains. Because maybe at half of time, it's I can see that it's not the right one, and everything I do was a waste of time. And for small companies, for mid-sized company, waste of time, it means loss of money. And it's not possible for many companies to have this luxury to spend the money for nothing.
Thank you, Raphael. And Terry, what are the reasons for small and mid-sized companies to focus on blockchain in our COVID-19 world?
Well, of course, I was thinking about this as we were sitting here in a lockdown position. And I think that what blockchain gives us all, and this is especially true in food, and I guess you could say that as you look at the meat industry right now, but it's a way for the buyer to be able to say they really took an effort, an extra effort to make sure that the supply and the perishables that they purchased were actually cared for along the way. In our case, for produce, that it is conformant to the produce traceability initiative, so that you know where it's coming from, and also for the FDA requirements for that the facility met HACCP requirements, and that the handling was good enough, or good, so that you didn't have counterfeit or you didn't have a switch, but then also how fresh it was in our particular focus, so that the buyer could say to the consumer right now, yes, I tried, and I'm caring about you. And I think that that might be more important than it would have been 4 months ago. And I think that that is something that's going to change as we are in this digital world where there is such disruption and people are trying to figure out exactly how they cope and how they fit and what happens in this new world we're in.
Thank you, Terry. Scott, do you have anything you'd like to add?
Yeah, look, I think it's been a tremendous learning experience for society, although very, very painful. It's taught us a lot of lessons around supply chain efficiencies and validation along the way. I think the lessons that we're learning from some of the PE equipment side of things is important. You know, the ability to not only validate authentication of equipment, but also looking at how you can effectively transfer allocations of equipment. So we look talking chain of custody, chain of ownership, validation of issuance, especially when you have really tight resources, limited resources. How can you effectively account for that in a digital world more accurately, more efficiently? So I think some of those lessons that we've seen with the management of this situation are being learned. And that's an omni-channel approach. That just is not just blockchain, but certainly blockchain can support some of the validation of distribution. Look, I think one of the key lessons that we're finding is that we are going to be in a different world when we come out of this. A lot of our customers globally are bricks and mortar family businesses that have been decimated by this horrible event. We're seeing a lot of those companies now look to pivot into the digital world. The diamond industry is a prime event, a prime example of that. So about 10% of the world's diamonds are sold online before COVID. And now it's hard to find a bricks and mortar store in the United States or anywhere in the world that is actually open selling diamonds. So from that perspective, we're seeing a lot of those family businesses and a lot of the large businesses having to really think about their whole go-to-market strategy, and the digital world is a bigger part of that strategy in the future. There's no question about that. Blockchain in the digital world will support the ability to more effectively validate that a product is authentic, support transfer of ownership, not only in a primary market sense, but also in secondary market sense as well, so that you will start to see some real different consumer behaviors coming, and secondary market will become much more important as we become far more protective and of our resources, more spendthrift from a consumer perspective. But also, we want efficiency in our supply chains. We want to be able to know that if we get hit by this type of virus again, how can we optimize the efficiency of our supply chain? And from that perspective, I think blockchain will play a big part of that.
And Raphael, do you have anything to add?
I think that blockchain can help also the supply chain of the surgical mask. In Italy, for example, someone imported the fake products from China that don't give us the right protection. Or maybe some companies change their production line to build the surgical mask, and there isn't a real tool to identify which masks are good, which are not. For example, we at One3D are using blockchain to help small companies to guarantee the effective goodness of the mask and to block any dangerous one. I think this is a big help in a COVID-19 world, where protection is the first things that people now think.
Thank you, Raphael. Now, sticking with you, Raphael, which blockchain can achieve the following goals: transparency, reliability, and security in tracing the supply chain, a public or private one?
Thank you, Michael. I think that in a world in which consumers are more and more interested in knowing what they buy, the blockchain has the final effect to enhance a climate of trust between companies and customers. That's why is the reason. That's why I prefer tracking items to a blockchain-based solution rather than using a traditional solution. I mean that it's true that traditional system can be able to track efficiently, in best way, products, but they are less safe than a distributed ledger or the blockchain. In traditional system, information are collected and stored in a single point, which also manage the access to them. So this system is weak, and it's easier for a malicious entity to enter and alter information. So I think companies can decide to complete transactions through a decentralized and distributed ledger, or a centralized and distributed ledger, which provide to validate transaction and to secure any information with cryptography. The first one, the decentralized, is called also public or permissionless blockchain. The latter one is called private or permission. And any of two ledgers, data are not stored and managed by any central authority, which has to validate transaction and regulate the access to information. But the ledger is accessible by every node of the network. So I mean that in a centralized ledger, a company controls every node and assures the safety on transaction, validates them, and manages the access to information. So I think that many companies prefer to complete transaction with a permissioned network, because the identity of all members is known, and validation of transaction is faster, and I no need to remuneration the nodes. What I try to explain is that the company consider permissioned blockchain a better solution to preserve some information with respect to a permissionless one. In a permissioned network, nodes are less, the consensus takes less time, and there is no need to pay validators. That's why the permissioned blockchain is normally usually developed by a private organization or an individual, where not everyone can read, write, audit transaction. And so the right audit permission is kept centralized, while read permission may be public, or maybe is restricted to a limited number of users. So from an organization point of view, a permissioned blockchain is cost effective and it is efficient. But from a consumer point of view, there is no guarantee that the information is always transparent and is not allowed to create the history of the product. Instead, with a permissionless or public blockchain, anyone can participate to read, write, or audit the transaction. So, being transparent and open to public, an individual can download and start running a public node on their local device, for example, send the transaction, validate it, track it. So, a permissionless blockchain like we use here in One2ID could really contribute to create loyalty between customers and the company. And in this way, I think it could become a competitive advantage respect to the companies which maintain a private tracking system. A survey conducted by Ernst & Young showed that customers are available to pay 70% more for products with a transparent supply chain. Thus, not only from customer point of view, but from the point of view of all stakeholders, there are important benefits for public blockchain. I can tell to limit collusion, to avoid double spending of certification, to fight frauds and black markets, and to prove the ethic responsibility and sustainability of the supply chain of the company that track their items.
Thank you, Raphael. Scott, do you have anything to add to that?
Yes, I do. I think Raphael hit some really good points. Whether it's public or private / permission, I think there's some key elements that have to be recognized, and that is that you have to have trusted input of data. Now, from that perspective, Everledger goes to a lot of pain, a lot of effort to do background checking, compliance checking on data going on to what is a managed platform, so that we have the purity of data. We try and take the human element out of it wherever possible, so that we're getting machine vision or IoT feed of data, and essentially doing background checking on participants, so that we have a high level of trust around the data that is even starting to go into the chain. And I think that's where, at the moment, a managed platform has some advantages, where you are able to also implement permissioning structures. So when you work with developers, and they're all blockchain geeks, and we all live in the world of utopia, where blockchains are immutable, and you see this chain of transactions. It's true, but I don't think that businesses want anyone seeing their costs, for example. I don't think that commercial sensitivities such as sourcing conditions, for example, necessarily need to be seen by the chain and participants in the chain. So the advantages of having a managed platform is that you can set up strong governance processes for the network and the participants. You can then also establish very strong permissioning elements around who can see what, what data is on chain for the world to see, what data is off chain, what network structures need to be deployed in order to protect that privacy or confidentiality, and what structures need to be there to support full transparency, and particularly when we're talking around objects and their source and their efficacy and their criteria, I suppose, that's been validated within the block. So from that perspective, I am a big fan of course, private blockchains and managed blockchains, but we've seen some incredible innovation come from public blockchains that can't be ignored. And I think that we're going to end up seeing a blend of technologies. And one example of that is the work that's been done in tokenization, non-fungible tokens, where we're actually giving an asset a digital identity in the form of a token. That token can then be utilized throughout the supply chain for various transactional activity, or indeed fractionalization. So if we're looking at sustainability and recycling at a later point, how do we take one key raw material and break it down into, or one key object and break it down into its components for recycling or repurposing? So we're seeing some evolution of both platforms, and I think ultimately we will see interoperability between public and private. I think we'll see some, we are seeing already some of the features that have been invented by public blockchains, such as tokenization, coming into private platforms as well, and private fabrics. So it's a really interesting space, and it's always a very interesting question. I think it's part of this maturation process of the technology.
Thank you, Scott. And Terry, do you have anything you want to add before we move forward?
I do. I do. Again, we start from a perspective that we have of a single-minded focus on perishables. So, so we have a very narrow vision to start with. And our goal, of course, is to be able to reach the consumer and be able to actually reach the consumer with the ability for the consumer to actually choose best flavor, or flavor that's that they like, knowing things about the product that they get. So like everything we do, you know, we wanted a hybrid almost right off, of both private and public. Our systems are set up so that there's permissions, and we're very GS1 oriented, and we're very much collecting the data at each segment and each handover throughout the supply chain. And so we had that to start with. But what we did not have is, we're also very heavy on collecting data as you go. And what we did not have was the ability to know, at that time, be able to say, this is private data for the provisioner or the brand owner, and this is data that's for the partners and those that they're sharing, which we needed because we wanted to reward the entire chain when something was really ultimately fresh. And then, of course, for the public, so that we could reach the consumer. So we have now, you know, come around and said, okay, we're going to divide our data so that the data can be divided into private, public, and partner, so that we can be able to do that. And we're very heavily into RF tags, or any kind of tags, UHF tags, Bluetooth tags. But the key is what you include on the tag, what do you include in the cloud, and how do you change the permissions. So it turned out that we needed the focus of being able to distinguish what data from the start needed to be private and what could be used for public. And we leaned to the private blockchain until you to the consumer. So what Scott said about, you know, having the two meld, and there'll be some options for both, is of course what we want.
Okay. Thank you, Terry. Raphael, the word blockchain is often associated with cryptocurrency. Can they live together when we are talking about the supply chain?
Well, I think it's important to distinguish between cryptocurrencies and blockchain technology. Not all cryptocurrencies operate on a blockchain, and not all blockchains use cryptocurrencies as part of their design. Cryptocurrencies is a form of digital currency. It's created, it maintained, and secured with strong cryptography. Modern cryptocurrencies are often exchangeable for fiat currencies, particularly if they can be bought or sold in a cryptocurrency exchange. They may have free floating values similar to share price on the stock market, and the value change between if the supply or the demand is more or less. Some cryptocurrencies attempt to peg or link their values to a value of something else, like gold or the US dollar. As said by Scott before, some blockchain also have non-fungible tokens. They are a digital representation of a unit of value. This unit of value may be virtual assets or digital representation or real world asset. Tokens are created using smart contract platform, and each token can be programmed with various features. In this case, using a cryptocurrency and a token like one true ID digital DNA, we can engage suppliers and engage customers to write in a blockchain of a supply chain much more information. Usually, in a typical supply chain model, the traceability of goods is limited to the information written by the company that tracks these goods. But in this way, it's not possible to know how good is the supplier or what happens to the goods after they are sold, are purchased in a retail shop. Using a blockchain with cryptocurrency for the supply chain also serve as a foundation of crypto economy system in which users are incentivized to participate and permit to advance the system. Blockchain technology itself, which powers cryptocurrencies, also has a wider array of use cases and has potential benefits for various industries. For my experience in the fashion market, companies have not control at all over suppliers, and they don't know if the cotton, for example, is taken respecting the environment. Also, the customer engagement to fight the counterfeit market and the gray market is a big problem. In fact, low quality products are sold with the same warranty of authentic products. So they cause important inconveniences in terms of safety and brand awareness. For my opinion, how we can resolve this problem? I think that we can reward any actors with cryptocurrency using smart contracts. I mean suppliers who declare in the supply chain that every step is taken with respect for the environment and for the workers, or the customers who continue to monitor the supply chain of items after they bought them in a retail store, helping to create a certified secondary market and block the distribution of fake products. Also, I think there is another advantage to use cryptocurrency in the supply chain. That is using the miners. The miners are the most important part of any cryptocurrency network, and they can provide accounting service for the community. The community itself, I think, takes the role of judge of any information within the supply chain, creating a virtual system in which the entity that declared the forgery is banned and will lose its market share.
Okay, thank you, Raphael. And we do have a few questions from our chat. So Scott, I don't know if you have anything quickly you wanted to add to this question.
We could spend a whole forum and webinar on this subject, Michael. My underlying position is that from the respect of energy use and environmental sustainability, whether it's that's something that every system needs to look at. And I have concerns around the mining structures around cryptocurrency, and I have concerns about the legislation around cryptocurrency, particularly in the United States, where every state has a different position. So we have to see a maturation of the cryptocurrency perspective in regards to that. What I do believe, though, is that fundamentally the two go together, and that essentially, whether it's cryptocurrency or whether it's fiat hinged to a tokenization structure, which is probably more realistic for the supply chain applications that we're talking today, that we will see maturation and evolution of the interoperability between cryptocurrency / crypto fiat and supply chain with public or private blockchain.
And Terry, quickly, if you have anything to add as well.
I don't have much to add. I think the two go together, and that it would be a really benefit when they do get together. But I agree with Scott.
All right, thank you guys. And our last question here, Raphael, what is the safest tool to identify an item and its ownership changes in a supply chain?
Usually implementing the traceability of products requires a unique identification system of the product, a data management system for each step of the supply chain, procedure that allow you to retrieve information about products, or elements to be tracked and every production processes. So traceability needs an identification system that assign a unique identification key to each product at every stage of production and distribution. In order for the system to function efficiently, the recording activity operator data must be updated and available quickly and easily with use of appropriate technologies. I mean that now the registration of documentation can be of the two types. The first, manual digital input, or the second, automated with different technologies, like NFC, RAIN RFID, BTLE, or QR code or barcode. But whether you use a barcode or numbers printed on paper, or whether you use NFC or RFID, the danger that these codes are alterated, are counterfeited is high, and it's possible to create a gray market of counterfeit products that have escaped the supply chain. In fact, the value of international trade in counterfeit goods is currently around 460 billion US dollar a year. So the safest solution to avoid this situation is to create a secure digital identity enabler distributed in a blockchain environment. And because our approach is agnostic, we can use different technologies, like before, NFC, RFID, BTLE, QR code, barcode. It's not important which one we use, because we can apply this secure digital code in any technology. In fact, we in Wine3D, we create a univocal secure code. We call it digital DNA for every item that a company wants to trace or to authenticate. For each of these items, the code is created with an encrypted key with SSL 128-bit, and using a decentralized distributed ledger, the blockchain collects information on every transaction made in the supply chain. In this way, an NFC application or a barcode scanner reads the tag content, decrypt the information, and displays data about the item's authenticity and its trace on the supply chain. In other words, whatever notification technology I choose, a single, secure, and encrypted code is needed to define the item in the supply chain and fight counterfeiting and the gray market at every stage of production or distribution on secondary market.
Thank you, Raphael, for that. Scott, do you quickly have anything to add?
I don't think there's any one technology. I think it's a symphony of technologies that support the identification of an object, and that ranges from natural DNA of an object and attributes of an object through to technologies that support more efficient supply chain authentication, such as NFC or RFID. We deploy a lot of NFC, particularly the higher level NFC technologies with rolling codes and cryptography, supporting some of the identity. And from that perspective, there is definitely a role of all of those technologies to build what is a social profile almost of an object. So if we look at an object and from its ecosystem perspective, in some cases it might have a barcode, in some cases it might be the item level or the carton or the pallet. How do we look at an object within its world? And just as we do with our own social profile, how do we social profile an object? And to do that, you have many interaction pieces and you have a number of identifiers that support that process. So that's something for the group to think about as social profiling of an object.
Thank you. And Terry, do you have anything to add as well?
You know, this is what we focus on. Because perishables are so GS1 centric, we also are RAIN RFID very advocates of it and centric. So everything we do always has a RAIN chip with it. We were the first to combine NFC and RAIN together. So because we needed to be able to support people in Southeast Asia or in Africa and have them be able to read. But we got to Kenya on one project and found that there was no NFC phones, and so we have a QR code. We are really agnostic on all of it, but overridingly everything that we do, we prefer to have a RAIN chip and something. Right now we have a RAIN chip tag with a RAIN, an NFC, and BLE, and that's going to extend to RAIN and NFC and LoRa, and because it's about servicing and collecting the data that's best suited for the environment. And you're really trying to accommodate that as best you can. Some have barcodes, some don't. And we're now, of course, adding crypto to it because that then makes it more secure. But in our particular case, we have been agnostic of the RF for probably 8 years now. And it's just the way it has to be.
Okay, great. Thank you, Terry. So I did want to get to some questions and comments from some of the listeners here. Appreciate the audience participation here. First question that we do have, and I'll just have one of you guys, whoever feels most comfortable answering these questions, answer that. How are automatic identification technologies like RFID plugging into blockchains? What are the challenges to realize this connection? For example, connectivity to the internet for updating, referencing the blockchain, consensus on how data is ingested, i.e. like GS1's EPCIS, other standardized data formats, uneven utilization of RFID or blockchain across supply chains, etc.
Wow, big question.
Yes.
I think the simple answer is follow standards. Certainly, we try and be guided by GS1 standards wherever they exist, or how they pertain to the technology where it is at this phase. Certainly, limitations are around the effectiveness of that data capture. Has a data capture solution been established effectively so that you actually are getting the capture 100% across an array? So from that perspective, we probably revert back to some of the discussion earlier. This system needs to be engineered correctly. You need to look at the capturing. You need to take people out of the equation as much as possible and automate the capture through IoT or APIs into ERP systems, for example. But definitely the coexistence of automatic data capture, and blockchain is really important for supply chains, really efficient for supply chains. And essentially, we are not seeing too many limitations at the moment. As far as object identities are concerned, yes, you have, once again, GS1 standards to follow, but there's so many standards out there, and I think sometimes object identity standards are confusing, but you're seeing also the evolution of new standards that address objects in the digital world, such as W3 standards, as I mentioned at the beginning of the talk. So a big subject. Once again, we could have another webinar around that and that alone, but I think Auburn are demonstrating some really nice initiatives in their RFID/blockchain project, and it would, I'd recommend that person to go to the Auburn RFID lab and read some of the material that they've been doing around with some of the largest retailers in the US and some of the largest manufacturers in the US.
Another question that we received is this just a private and heavily encrypted EDI? And I think when they're saying EDI, they mean electronic data interchange.
I can go again. In some ways, yes, but there's some relevant pieces to that. If structured correctly, you have independent, trusted data going into a blockchain environment that can form the basis of a trust and transparent supply chain, as opposed to one centrally controlled EDP. So from that perspective, that's why you look at a ledger: independent, trust, distributed input of data that supports supply chain transparency.
Great, thank you for that, Scott.
And security.
Yes. Another question we have is, currently in terms of revenues, what's the main business sector that has widely adopted the blockchain technology?
From us, it's diamonds, it's gemstones, it's luxury, particularly around apparel, and it's insurance, so financial services, and the fast emerging market space is in the area of special minerals and metals, supporting circular economies. So essentially, in the beginning, that's things like cobalt, which also suffers, if you think about it, from some of the same issues as diamonds, in that it can be sourced from conflict nations that where human rights can be an issue. So it's also a rare and precious mineral that needs to be supported by circular economy structure. So from an Everledger perspective, those are the publicly available verticals that we focus on, as well as my favorite, which is wine and spirits.
Thank
you. And Terry, do you have anything to add to that?
No, I think we see it in perishables. It's going to be fish, and it is fish because of the counterfeiting and the high price of some of the fish. Again, we see it also in apparel.
Great, thank you, Terry. And Raphael.
Also in a fashion market to fight counterfeit, in the food, the wine. There are many industries that needs a real blockchain solution to demonstrate the authenticity of own products. In particular, made in Italy is often counterfeit, and we are many blockchain solution to have to demonstrate how good is good.
All right, thank you, Raphael. And that concludes our question and answer session for today. Once again, Scott, Raphael, and Terry, I appreciate your time and your insights today.
Thank you.
Thank you, Michael. Thank you, everyone.
Yep, and thank you to our audience for their active participation. Look forward to talking to everyone again soon.